All right, friends, good night. That sounds super loud to me. Can y'all hear me? It's okay? Okay, sorry. Okay, good morning, friends, and welcome. I decided after a long break over COVID, I hadn't taught an in-person class, and I thought I would start an every other week Bible study, and doing it at 11 in the morning, repeating it at 7 at night. And I decided to start with, just a softball, easy topic. I chose this because people have been asking me things, saying things. It's just, if there's anything to be concerned about in the world right now, I think it would be Gaza. It's kind of trumped in people's minds over Ukraine and such things. I don't pretend to have all the answers or know everything, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things, so hang in there with me. And I may talk longer than normal and have less time at the end for Q&A. But that's fine. Happy to field your questions when the time comes. Gaza. On October the 7th, the news came out about terrible things going on in Gaza. I immediately thought of people that I know. We used to have two close friends who live in Jerusalem, and they have 4 sons who live in the direction of Gaza from Jerusalem, Hannah and Howell Kessler. I reached out to them immediately. They were out of the country. They were in Rome visiting Hannah's brother. Everybody else was trying to get out of Israel. They were trying to get back into Israel because they have a bunch of grandchildren and wanted to try to be of help and support to everyone there. I thought about my friend Sophia, who was my travel organizer there. She lives in the north in Galilee, and immediately when this happened in Gaza, people rightly began to worry about what would happen at the Lebanese border. And I thought of a bunch of people, so I got fixated on these children. Last summer, Lisa and I went to Hebron, and the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so on. And we went in the mosque there, and there were these just terrifically cute little children that we befriended and ran around and played with a bit. And I thought about children in all of these places. What a situation. When we think about things like Gaza here, this isn't a political conversation, but there's politics in it. There has to be, right? We try to look to our Christian faith, but in this case, not just to our Christian faith, but also to Judaism and Islam. And if we look to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam for help, we have to reckon with the fact that there are always perversions of these religions. There are always extremes in these religions. We hear a lot about Islamic extremism. There's Jewish extremism. There is Christian extremism. So that's the thing. And we know from history that fundamentalisms in all these religions tends to go violent. I would add, I was thinking about this, it's not just enough, right, though, to say that there are Christians, Jews, or Muslims who are involved, because sometimes there's I don't have the right word for it, a thinness of this. Like people in America will say, I shouldn't say this. I'll be in trouble, and we're a minute in. But let me try it. People in America say, we have to have a Christian president. And my question is, do we want a robustly Christian president or a thinly Christian president? We've had some, I made a list. It's a bipartisan list of thinly Christian presidents. Now, a thickly Christian president would be who? Jimmy Carter. Like, this is a dude, taught Sunday school when he was in the White House, retired, works on Habitat, man of deep faith. But thin religious people, you have, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy. These people would say that they're Christian, but they're not the kind of people that would take disciple Bible study or show up for a mission trip. The kind of things that we usually think of as with robust Christianity. On John F. Kennedy, I love the moment he was running for Congress. Running for the Senate, and Jackie was there. And somebody asked Jackie if it was a problem that Jack was a Catholic, if you remember this was an issue at the time. And Jackie responded, she said, it's so unfair for people to criticize Jack for being a Catholic. He's such a poor Catholic. So a lot of times we think it's a warfare between religions, but these are often poor Christians, poor Jews, poor Muslims. It's just a thing. Gaza appears in the Bible quite a number of times. Samson dies in Gaza, Judges 16. Amos chapter 1, verse 7, Amos prophesies that Gaza would be ruined and deserted. It's like that seems to be coming true, oddly. You hear about the Philistines in the Old Testament. They come from Gaza, down on the coast there. And the Philistines are so interesting. The Israelites are in dread of them, not because they're bigger or stronger, but they have a technological advantage. We're going from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, and we just think, well, that's something you learn about in school. No. If you're an Israelite, you got a bronze shield, you got a bronze sword. That's always worked very well for you. You go into battle against the Philistines, and their shield looks a little different. You take your bronze sword, you hack at that shield, and it's made of iron, and your bronze sword just shatters. And you think, we're toast. And you run for the exits. Gaza also appears in the Bible in Acts chapter 8 on the heels of a story of religious violence, the stoning of Stephen, right? Paul is present. You have the story on the road to Gaza of the Ethiopian eunuch. Here's a person who would have been a victim of great prejudice in that area. Philip encounters him. They have a conversation about Christ, the suffering servant. It's a great story. Acts chapter 8. Location, always an issue for Gaza. Where it's located, they're subjectively, they're summarily crushed over time by the Assyrians, the Egyptians, Pompey the Great, the Saracens, the Crusaders, everybody. The Bible has a lot to say about these things. I would start with, countless examples. It's like a Baptist sword drill, trying to get there quickly. See the Baptists in the room laugh. They know what that is. Methodists are like, what? So in Isaiah chapter 4, this says that they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. We just came from the season of Christmas. When the angels come down, what do they sing? They sing what? Peace on earth. Christ is supposed to be the one who brings peace on earth. In my morning sermon on Christmas Eve, I quoted my friend who's pastor here in Charlotte named Kate Murphy, who asked these questions. How can we sing lullabies celebrating the birth of a Jewish Palestinian child while bombs fall on the rubble of Gaza? How can we sing about the quiet calm of, oh, little town of Bethlehem while soldiers carry out deadly raids in that very town? How can we dare to sing of a silent night, knowing that no child in Gaza can possibly sleep in heavenly peace? I was trying to think, what does Christianity have to say to this situation? In Gaza, a lot of people live in Gaza. You know how many of them are Christian? 900, minus a few, because some have been killed in this conflict, including some people who are connected through Jim and Sue here. So in the Bible, as Christians, we can think about there is a promise of peace in the Bible. Jesus also shows us a way to peace, but you can't walk into Gaza and say, here's Jesus' way of peace. Like that would be real successful, wouldn't it? So some flaws that we have in thinking about such things. One is we Americans, it's a great fault that we have. We love to identify who are the good guys and who are the bad guys on the basis of not much information. And once we've identified who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, a host of assumptions follow about the good guys and the bad guys. In this case, it's more complicated. I was talking to a friend recently who has a son who was in graduate school at Vanderbilt. I didn't show you Kate Murphy's picture. There she is. The Bible study that she did with me. My friend has a son who's a graduate student at Vanderbilt. I knew that his son had lived in Israel for a couple of years. So I asked him, I said, how's your son thinking about this Gaza situation? I love what he said. He said, if you drew a Venn diagram of students at Vanderbilt, he said, you have students who are pro-Palestinian, and you have students who are pro-Israeli. He said, those two circles cross in one person at Vanderbilt. He said, and that would be my son, who, as it turns out, is pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli. I said, I am so proud of your son. We can chart the history of what has gone on, and the history of how we got there is important, and it's a theological thing. God's been watching over history, concerned about it. The history also is unfolding. In this morning's news, did you track this morning? There was the assassination of a Hamas official in Lebanon. This is a recipe. It's just horrifying what could happen. Shipping in the Red Sea. And this could blow into a much larger conflict before we know it. But charting history, this story did not begin October 7th. I talked to one guy. He said, "You're doing a program on Gaza." He said, "That should take you about 30 seconds. I can't do it in 30 seconds. What's going on didn't start October 7th, although some people seem to think everything was fine until October the 7th. And it actually didn't really start in or near Gaza. We can go way back in history. The Jews had the Holy Land, although 1,000 years before they lost it to the Romans at the end of the first century, they had taken it in turn from the Canaanites who had lived there for centuries. But the Israelites took over. King David, come to the time of the Romans, Jews are basically expelled. So they've lost the land for all of that time. We come to the Ottoman Empire. Think back to school days, Ottoman Empire. When World War I comes along, the Ottoman Empire was huge, controlled a huge amount of the Middle East. The Ottomans decided to take sides with the Germans. They lost the war. At that time, of course, Gaza is down here. This was a thinly populated area, not big urban areas. You had a lot of Arabs, Muslims who lived there, but some Jews had begun to move into the area. There wasn't a lot of conflict over that. They just were living there. Of course, what happened at the end of World War I, we always have problems in the world, don't we? Because of, I don't know what to call it, Western European arrogance. At the end of World War I, the powers of Europe thought, we know how the world should be divided. We had the war over Kuwait. There was a line between Iraq and Kuwait. They didn't draw that line ever. Europeans drew that line. So 1919, World War I ends, and the Europeans think, what should we do with what used to be the Ottoman Empire? And so they began to divide up the land, and one of the things, an idea that they thought was brilliant, so you have the British who come in, the Balfour Declaration. You've perhaps heard of this from school. Arthur Balfour, he was an English official. He really wrote a letter to someone, but it went viral. They didn't use the term viral back then. It went viral, and it said, we think there ought to be maybe a nation of Israel there. Well, this upset, of course, the Palestinians, the Arabs who lived there. The British published a plan for partition. That seemed like a good idea. Let's have sort of two nations there. And so they drew a map of how this partition would go. Again, people on the ground aren't being consulted, aren't making decisions about themselves. Zionism at this time is on the rise worldwide. Jews had begun to organize in the late 1800s worldwide to say, we are sick to death of anti-Semitism, which didn't begin on October the 7th, which didn't begin with the Holocaust. It has been throughout human history, Middle Ages, you name it. They're tired of it, so this movement of Zionism, they want a homeland. What they want, the way Theodore Herzl articulated is we have never been a majority anywhere. We would like to be a majority somewhere. Hence the quest to be a majority somewhere. There's a book that came out recently. It's become a really hot seller, reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. I read it by Orrin Kessler called Palestine 1936. By 1936, the idea that Europe is supporting a nation of Israel in the land where the Arabs, the Palestinians have lived, is beginning to upset them. So you have little outbreaks of violences. There's skirmishes here and there, 2 people killed, 4 people killed, a bombing, 6 people are killed. Tensions are rising during the 1930s. It finally culminates in a war in 1948, and Israel was just getting organized, having an army. They had no expertise. They weren't a nation yet. Somehow they managed to win this war against all of the Arab powers, and so you have a nation of Israel Still not recognized by many people in 1948. I'll show you a few more maps. 1949, the UN issued armistice lines, and this should be familiar. You have the West Bank. It's on the west bank of the Jordan River. If you've not been there, Jerusalem right on the edge of that, Gaza down here on the coast. So 1949, all of that is divided. You have the 1967 war. Israel, again, shocks the world. Israel defeats all of the Arab countries that attacked them at once. And they win the West Bank, they win the Golan Heights, they win Gaza. I mean, they are big winners, but they realize they've got a mess on their hands. So the plan comes to be to divide things this way, that the West Bank will be Palestinian, Gaza will be Palestinian. And the complication since then, if you've been with me to Israel, I don't try to spend too much time on it, but one of the things that we see is that the West Bank should be all green, because that's supposed to be Palestinian territory. But what's happened is Israel keeps going into the West Bank building settlements. This is the dirty word in all of this. Let's just build a little town here. Let's build a little neighborhood here. Let's build another little town here. And there's settlements all over the West Bank. And if you're a Palestinian, this is a problem, right? Because you're trying to think toward, they're trying to think toward a two-state solution. And if you're Palestinian, you're thinking, well, if there's a two-state solution, we don't like the idea because the land used to all be ours, but if there's a two-state solution, we at least get this. But now the Israelis are coming in all the time and building little villages in our part of the country, and they've got stronger security than anyone else. Huge problem. Of course, the Holocaust has happened since all of this began. So you have Jews who are huge numbers, millions killed in the Holocaust. 1.5 million children killed in the Holocaust. Jews then say, we have to be a majority somewhere. We are endangered. And don't think that anti-Semitism ended with the Holocaust. Right now, over the last 5 or 6 years, there has been a spike in anti-Semitism worldwide. There's been a spike in anti-Semitism in America. There's been a spike of anti-Semitism in Charlotte, North Carolina, my friends. So this is the thing. I don't want to go to that yet. You had the Intifadas. Very interestingly, in 2005, everybody's trying to figure out what to do. Is there a two-state solution? Increasingly, people just think that's never going to work out. What's going to happen? In 2005, Israel vacated Gaza. They said, we're out of Gaza. We're not there any longer. And that's when, shortly after that, Hamas came to power in Gaza, which has not been good. David Brooks had an op-ed in the New York Times over the weekend. Did you read it? If you didn't, you should. David Brooks said that 2005 was a great opportunity. He said in Gaza beginning in 2005, instead of creating what they had, they could have created, and he uses a good example, Dubai. Dubai, very small territory, had an opening for freedom. And what did they do? Boy, they developed into this economic power where tourists want to come. Gaza has great beaches. But instead of becoming Dubai, Gaza came to be dominated by Hamas that has a vow, right? Hamas' vow is we must get rid of Israel. Period. So that's a thing to deal with, of course. There increasingly is an imbalance of power. I'm so interested these days in that they use the word war when referring to what's going on in Gaza. I don't know how it's a war when you have such an imbalance of power. 1,200 Israelis were killed, and that's 1,200 too many, but the death toll in Gaza now is, it goes up so rapidly every day, 24,000, 25,000. 500,000 citizens of Gaza no longer have homes that have been destroyed. So that's the thing. I started reaching out to people to see what they would say if they were here today. I reached out to Rabbi Michael Wal, who's become a great friend. Lisa and I spent Passover at their home, and I reached out to Michael. He's the rabbi at Temple Israel. And I said, let's get together and talk. He said, I'm getting on a plane to go to Israel. This is the other day. So we flew to Israel, and this morning he sent me these photos from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which is just over the border from Gaza. And it's one of the places where the Gazans, where Hamas came and slaughtered people. So he went over there just to be in solidarity with Jews in this community, which tells you something about the Jewish community in Charlotte. The Jewish community in Charlotte doesn't think, we're the Jewish community in Charlotte. Thank God we're here. We don't have any connection to anybody else. The Jewish community in Charlotte feels very much connected to, and they always have relatives and close friends who live in Israel. So he's gone to visit, and so here's a home, here's another home, devastated by Hamas. My friends Howell and Hannah that I showed you at the beginning of the program, they told me that after they got back to Israel, they went to 2 funerals for people that they knew, that they had gone camping with on the beach just last summer. So we tend to read these things. It seems like a news item. These are real stories with real people. I reached out to Judy Schindler, who used to be the rabbi at Temple Bethel here in Charlotte. She teaches at Queens now. And I said, Judy, what would you say? She talked about the horrors of October the 7th. She said, this is the worst day for Jews worldwide since the Holocaust. That's a pretty strong statement. And she pointed out it's not just the death toll, but if you track this at the time, it was the manner in which people were killed. There were rapes, beheadings, tortures of children, the elderly. Horrible, horrible way to carry on things. The worst day since the Holocaust. Judy went to Israel in November. And she underlines that for Jews, the importance of getting rid of Hamas is a thing, because Hamas has a vow to get rid of Israel. And we kind of hear that and say, why can't they all just get along? I don't know. Let's say, let's say the Clemson Tigers, and why do they have fans? I don't even know. But let's say they vowed that we must exterminate all North Carolina fans, the school, everything. This isn't even imaginable to us, right? But if something like that happened, you wouldn't say, well, let's just kind of talk sometime. Their vow, their reason for existence is to get rid of it. So that's the thing. Judy questioned if some of the decisions that the IDF has made in Gaza have been the best decisions, right? War goes that way, but have they created damage and caused death where they didn't really need to? Of course, Hamas, you know this if you're following me, Hamas is very clever. If you're at a power differential, you can't just line up and go fight with Israel. What do? You do things like you barricade yourself in a school for children. You barricade yourself in a hospital for people that are sick. You do these that's how war goes. That's how war has always gone in every place in the world. I reached out to Jibril Huff. Jibril is one of the probably 3 or 4 best-known Muslims in the city, and he's become a friend over time. He grew up at the Methodist Children's Home in Winston-Salem. This is pretty interesting. And he has a very poor taste in clothing. I had a selfie with him, but I wanted you to see that. Just kind of question his judgment. I reached out to Jibril, and he said, what we're watching right now is genocide. And you can think, well, it's not genocide, but if you're pro-Palestinian, if you have friends in Gaza and the West Bank, if you're a Muslim in the world, it feels like genocide. And he said it's not about Hamas only any longer, hence what all is going on the West Bank, where Hamas does not exist, but there's been a lot of oppression since the war began. Jibril said that Netanyahu, if you remember when all this happened, they said, they had information that Hamas was about to do something, and Netanyahu got caught unawares. How terrible. So he thinks what Netanyahu is doing is that since he got caught unawares, he's really flexing his muscles to show, I am really strong. I'm going to show them that I'm not weak, that I am a leader that Israelis can trust. I reached out to Asher Knight, who's now the rabbi at Temple Bethel, and Asher sent me a long email message that was just lovely that I wish I could share it all with you. He said that when we look at a situation like this, he says it's not just a matter of politics. There's a whole web of emotion and history that goes into it. He said Jews have a never again mentality. I don't know if you remember after 9/11, that was kind of the Americans' chant, never again. We will never again let that. Well, in Israel, they've really got a never again over what? The Holocaust. That's a little more understandable than a never again after 9/11, right? The Holocaust, they have a never again mentality, which is understandable, and that their entire military strategy is based on never again and feeling vulnerable. You and I tend to think about the Israeli army, we think, wow, they're so powerful, look how powerful they are. But they, as Israel, always feel vulnerable. After what happened, and with rising anti-Semitism in the world. So their military strategy, as Asher put it, is based on past traumas, rising anti-Semitism in the world. I reached out to my friend John Ederer. I had a better picture, John, but I love this. We got caught in an embrace one time when I was leading an interfaith worship service, and he was giving the talk. John's a good friend. He's an imam here in Charlotte. And he talked to me about the conditions in Gaza prior to October the 7th. Prior to October the 7th, Gaza wasn't, like a health resort where you would want to go and visit. People describe Gaza as a concentration camp. There's a huge wall around Gaza. You've heard about the thickness of the population there. People are crammed in there. Many of them have jobs in Jerusalem, and because of the way the roads are and the difficulty of the checkpoints, it's so hard to get to work. They lose their job. The conditions in Gaza before 9/11, there were evictions, arrests that were going on. John believes, this is interesting, that the information was there that Hamas was going to attack, and Netanyahu knew it, and he did nothing. Why? That gave him the cover to do what he has wanted to do all along, which is to go in and obliterate Gaza. 500,000 people's homes are destroyed, and if you track what's going on, the conditions there are unhealthy, unspeakable, unacceptable, and inhumane. Certainly true. Is there a way out? How do we think about a way out? It's the kind of thing Christians do. We want to be we want to be positive, optimistic. A book came out about, 25 years ago called The Lemon Tree. It's a true story written by Sandy Tolan, and it's about two people, right? If two people can't work it out, how are you going to get these big entities to work it out? So it's a story of two people trying to work it out. So it's about a guy named Bashir Kairi, who lived as a child in a town called Ramla, not Ramallah, but Ramla. And in 1948, when Israel won the war, he and his family were sent to a refugee camp. This is pretty interesting. By the way, in 1948, many Palestinians were sent to refugee camps, and they still live in them. And friends, it's 2023. There is a refugee camp in Bethlehem. I've been to visit it, and you can meet people there that they are grandparents, and they were born in that refugee camp. Just expelled from their homes, from what is now Jewish territory. This young man, he was banished with his family. They went to a refugee camp, and he just always remembered his childhood home. It was very small and modest, and that there was a lemon tree in the backyard. So finally, after things loosened up a little bit, he decided he wanted to go back and see the house. So he goes to see the house, and he meets a woman there named Dahlia Landau. Dahlia's family, most of them were killed in the Holocaust. She and a couple of other family members managed to escape, and they said, you can go to Israel on this boat. They got on the boat. They went to Israel. When they got to Israel, they said, you can live in this house. No one else was in that house. No one else was in that neighborhood. They moved into the house. She's lived in that house and loved the house and the lemon tree. So the young man who grew up there meets the woman who has grown up there. They're adults, and you can just imagine, this whole book is about this encounter. And they try very hard to become friends. And they do become friends, but it's not a happily ever after story like that. He moved back into the house and they married, and we're saying it's not that kind of story. Because they finally come to a point they can't figure out how to get past what happened. What happened for him, losing her home, being sent to a refugee camp? What happened to her family being killed in an anti-Semitic Europe, and finally having a homeland to go to? And then we talk about things like the two-state solution. Increasingly, people don't believe it's even possible to have a two-state solution. The closest we came, I think, and a lot of people think, is with Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin is the leader in Israel, and with him there was he commanded so much respect, and they were making progress. This is when Clinton was president, and so on. Sadat, tremendous strides toward peace, and then of course he was assassinated. Not by the other side, but people on his side. It kind of changes what sides mean, right? Somebody could say, I'm on James's side, but they become an extremist killer. They're not on my side anymore, although they'd say they're on my side. So somebody on his side assassinated him. I got to visit his grave there in Jerusalem. I love the simplicity of it. It's just this large stone, and it just says, Yitzhak Rabin. Like, enough said. If you don't know the story of this man, he's like the great in my view, the great Israeli of modern times. Where are the people? Somebody drew this Venn diagram. I don't know if this is right, since we're doing Venn diagrams. You have most Israelis, most Palestinians. Most Israelis and most Palestinians that I've ever met are very reasonable people who don't want war and violence going on. They want to come to some kind of settlement or maybe a two-state solution and so on. Then you have the far right, becoming ever more far right Israeli government, that they don't really want that so much. And then you have Hamas on the left. Their days have to be numbered, although you wonder, what will it mean when Hamas is no more? Sometimes we try to exterminate somebody and you create a worse evil. We wanted to bring Saddam Hussein down, and people thought, if we just get rid of Saddam Hussein, everything will be well. Oh, my Lord. There were terrible people ready to come in and fill that vacuum behind him. People. It always reminds me of after the Charlottesville tragedy, Donald Trump saying, they're good people on both sides. In this instance, there are good people on both sides. I don't think they want to be on sides, although all of them love the land, want the land, need the land. All of them fear the other. They all want security. It's just one of those things. In the course of this discussion, by the way, there's slogans that come to be confusing. I better check my time. How am I doing? I've been talking a long time. I don't have too much longer. There's slogans that can become difficult. There was, I don't remember if it was the Sunday after October the 7th or the second Sunday after. I was on my bike one Sunday afternoon, and I rode downtown Charlotte, and there was a massive demonstration going on there. Several thousand people were marching down Tryon Street. I thought, what in the world is this? And it was a pro-Palestinian demonstration here in the city of Charlotte. And the chant that they kept repeating on a lot of their flags said this, was from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea. I shuddered at first, because you haven't been to Israel, the river to the sea. The river would be the Jordan River. The sea would be the Mediterranean Sea. What that means to some people is we want the whole land. Turns out, for other people, that's a slogan for they want justice in the whole land. They don't want Israel out of there, but they want an end to injustice from the river to the sea. See how slogans go? And a lot of times there's some anti-Semitic thing, and I'm known to be a friend of the Jewish community. The rabbis here have always been good friends of mine. I'm so blessed by that. And they'll have some kind of event, and I always go to the event because I want to be a friend and a supporter. But they always use the slogan, do you stand with Israel? And that's interesting language, isn't it? Because if you say, I stand with Israel, I do stand with Israel. I do not stand with Netanyahu and his government. And most Israelis that I know do not stand with Netanyahu and his government. So if you say, do you stand with Israel? Yeah, yeah. So slogans can be very dangerous. There also is, it's just parenthetically, remember when I was in seminary, we learned about holy war theory, just war theory, right? So through the Middle Ages, theologians met and they said, what would make a war just? And what would a holy war, what could justify a war? And they came up with all these principles. I remember just thinking, people are going to fight because they want to fight, whether you have these principles or not. One of the principles, though, of holy war, just war theory is proportionality. Proportionality. Clemson comes and, I don't know, they mistreat 2 North Carolina fans. It would be inappropriate then to kill 10,000 Clemson fans in response, right? Right now we are seeing the lack of proportionality. All the people could defend it for different reasons. So let's think back to Bible and theology. In Genesis chapter 12, God makes a promise to Abraham. If you remember this, God says, I promise that I will make you a great nation, and I promise that I will give you this land. And it's that promise of the land that has been hugely problematical. It's also problematical. Why? Who thinks that they are the ones who are hearing God's promise to Abraham for the land? Some Christians have done that. Yeah, that's a stretch. But clearly Jews hear that. God promised us the land. Muslims hear that because Abraham is the ancestor of the Muslims. They hear that. The land is promised to us. I thought about this. Rembrandt did this pen and ink of Abraham when God has asked him to sacrifice Isaac, his only child. And he's about to kill him, and the angel comes and intervenes. And I just love the way Rembrandt captured the grief on Abraham's face. And when I went back to this, I thought about, try to picture Abraham in heaven looking down at what's going on in this land. I can't fathom that Abraham is cheering for one side, right? I imagine that Abraham looks down and Abraham is filled with intense grief over what's going on. God looks down, isn't cheering for one side, but is filled with intense grief. The other thing is, God promises the land to Abraham. And if you track all of Abraham's story, what Abraham is about, this is a mosaic out of the Byzantine period from Ravenna. And it's the story of, you know the story, in Genesis chapter 18, 3 strangers show up, and Abraham offers them what? Hospitality. Well, it turns out like they're not guys, they're angels. They're maybe the very presence of God telling Sarah that she's going to have a child. But Abraham says, come in, we'll make a meal for you. So Abraham is famous for hospitality, right? So if you're living into the covenant, God makes a promise to Abraham. That covenant also requires that Abraham be a person of hospitality, that his people be a righteous people, a people of hospitality. What we see now instead is something that is very different in two ways. One is when you decide security is everything, bad things happen. Why? You have mere mortals that are in charge of security and they do dumb stuff because you give them some power to enforce security and they do dumb things. This is why, let's take policing in America. Most policemen that I know are wonderful people and they're very good at being policemen. But there are a few people that got a little too much power. They're sinful people. They do stupid stuff. They harass people. In Israel, there is so much harassment bred from these relationships. In a case that I saw one time, I had a group in Israel, and I had to come back to the U.S. early, so I was in a small little transport van with, I think, 3 other people. And we left Jerusalem. It was dark, and we were headed toward Tel Aviv to the airport, and we came to the last checkpoint before you get to the airport, and I was chatting with a guy there. He was from Ohio. But he had dual citizenship because his mother had been a Palestinian. He'd been to visit her. He was headed back to Ohio. And we were stopped at the security checkpoint, and they looked at everybody's passport, and they came and they literally grabbed this young man and pulled him off the bus. He's pulling his guitar behind him. That's all he had with him. He opens the guitar. They open the guitar box, and they start looking at it, shaking it. They took a knife, and they cut the guitar strings off the guitar, and then slammed it on the ground, breaking it, looked inside and said, "Here, you can go now." He got back on the van, he looked at me and he said, "Welcome to Israel." So those things happen. There are atrocities all over the place. And then the settlements, again, just to talk about the settlements, that's the dirty word. Netanyahu's policy is to keep building settlements all kinds of places. Lisa and I went to Hebron, which is as Palestinian a place as you can get on the West Bank. They have begun to build settlements in Hebron. Barbed wire fences around, massive security, right? But it's so important to them to build on West Bank territory that they will pay for all of that security so that people can live there. And the people that want to live there, right? Because that's so important to them. Painful thing. Theologically, how do we think about this? I told in a sermon a while back, I was on an interfaith panel here in Charlotte a few months back, and we were sitting on stools, and I figured what the question was, and the first person, I think he was Jewish, he said, part of what's beautiful is that when I mess up, God forgives me for messing up. And the second guy, he was Muslim, he said, same thing. When I mess up, God forgives me for messing up. And it came to me, and I said, my problem is not that I mess up. My problem is I'm a mess. And the world is a mess. We forget that, right? We think we're pretty good people, and you make a mistake once in a while. When you make a mistake, you try to make up for it. You try to get forgiveness for it. We forget that we live in a fallen world. We live in a broken world. All of us are part of it. All of us are participants in it. That's why there's so many unsolvable problems, and this seems to be one of them. I love the artist Masaccio pictured Adam and Eve. They have fallen from grace in the garden. They're being banished to live east of Eden, and you can just see the grief that they have, that they now have to go and live in a fallen world. So in a fallen world, we find things like Gaza. Right? What we have in Gaza is you have two sides. Both have a really good case, and both are terribly flawed. Both have tried to do noble things, and both have done terrible things. And it's a long history. It didn't start on October the 7th. There's a long history of pain being inflicted, a long history of pain being born. And it's very personal. It's not just political. Everybody has a story, like the guy that I met with the guitar. There's a group in Jerusalem that I've met with several times when I've been over there. They are mothers of Palestinians and mothers of Israelis who have been killed in the violence. And they talk to each other. And they tell their story. What was that like? And you watch, and it's so heartbreaking. And you see, they want to be at peace, but nobody can figure out. That's part of how it is in a fallen world. Is there any hope at all? It's easy to blame the extremists, but even if you didn't have the extremists, you'd still have a massive problem, wouldn't you? It wouldn't be that easy. My friend Walter Brueggemann wrote a little book, very short, called Chosen: Reading the Bible Amid the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. It's a pretty good book. And he tries to think theologically of what's going on. And the question that he asks at the end is there any hope? Is there any hope? And he's a little skeptical about hope, but he talks about it, and he says the first thing is that we may need a ceasefire, but a ceasefire is not peace. If today they said, no more shooting in Gaza, everybody go home, that would not be peace. Why? You still have gross injustice, and you have gross memory of violence. So how do you begin to move toward reconciliation? Reconciliation would be great. That's when you're divided from somebody and you forgive, but you actually work it out and you love each other when you're done. I don't know if that could ever happen. Maybe you could have tolerance, though. I always think tolerance is overrated. But tolerance could be a thing in this part of the world. Walter Brueggemann says, biblically, for such a thing to happen, we have to have a lot of honesty, a lot of humility, and a lot of confession of sin. on both sides. And that's what's hard to come by in such situations. It's hard to come by for us, isn't it? I see married couples that are like, they're about to kill each other. And nobody wants to say, I am so sorry for what I have done to create this situation. I just say a Clemson person. I'm so sorry. Anyway, it's fine. Yeah. You can wear that even in our church. We welcome everyone. But you see a married couple, and they're not quick to get to humility. They're not quick to get to confession. There's a lot of blame. There's a long history of hurt, so it's difficult. For forgiveness to happen, there has to be some cost to me. I don't get everything that I want. Some of what I might want, there will be cost. I will not get that. And we need to remember, the forgiveness doesn't make everything okay, right? You have things like those Amish families in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania, whose children were killed by that guy named Charles Roberts, right? And they go to, and he turned the gun on himself and killed himself. Those Amish parents went to his parents and forgave. And we go, oh, that's amazing, right? It doesn't make everything okay. Their children are gone, right? So you've got to kind of own there's a past that we're going to have to continue to live with so much pain. The other thing that Brueggemann says that's so interesting is that, I love the way he puts this. He said, the chosen, Israel, they think themselves as the chosen people. Everybody in the world thinks of themselves as the chosen people. He says, the chosen must choose beyond their chosenness. The chosen must choose beyond their... You can't simply say, well, we're the chosen people. That's to miss the whole point. God chooses Abraham not so that Abraham can bask and get all the blessing. God chooses Abraham to be a blessing to everyone else. You have to choose beyond your chosenness. And when he talks about that, he's also talking about the United States and our sense of exceptionalism, that we're the best nation, we're the finest people. It's all about American interest abroad. We have to choose beyond our chosenness, because the truth be told, America's part of the problem in the Middle East. There's hatred and resentment toward America, and then we pretty much have given Israel a blank check. And why have we given Israel a blank check? Easy. Politicians are currying Jewish donations and votes here, or evangelical donations and votes. Different issue, another day. I would commend to you, sometimes people say, what can I read to learn more about Israel? A few months back, this book came out by a guy named Daniel Sokach called Can We Talk About Israel? It got reviewed in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and so on. It's become a bestseller. I read it, and it's to me kind of the clearest, as unbiased as you can get, explanation of what's going on over there. And I reached out to, I'd never known this guy. I just thought, I'll take a flying leap. And he responded and said he would be on my podcast. So we talked, he acted like I was his best friend lifetime. It was great. So you can listen to the podcast, but also this book is a pretty clear explanation of all the stuff that's going on over there. I can't think of anything sadder than Gaza. It can hardly be, but then you can't not pay attention to what's going on. You can, but you can't not pay attention to what's going on in God's world. And it's not going to be better tomorrow or next week. It's just such a sad, tragic thing. Yet we believe there is a God. We believe in the promise of peace, that one day there will be peace. Anyway. All right. I wish I had a happy ending to this. Those are kind of my thoughts on Gaza, what's going on, and why. So I'll take my life in my hands. Do you have a question? I don't think I want to entertain a speech. Just it's a sensitive topic, right? But questions, anyone? Glenn?
Do you know if Bethlehem Bible College still exists?
I don't know. Bethlehem is an interesting place. The assumption is, oh, Bethlehem's just full of Christians. And the fact is, almost no Christians are left in Bethlehem. Years ago, I had a guide when I would go to Israel, and he was a Christian who lived in Bethlehem. And he would always email me on Christmas Eve with these very sad stories about oppression of Christians in Bethlehem. And most people were moving away and just couldn't live there any longer. So I don't really know about that particular school. Yeah, great question. Yes, Retha. You know, it's easy to say, and I rarely just say, pray. That sounds just like so easy. But at some point, that's kind of like as much as we can do at the moment. I do always have thoughts, and some people don't welcome them coming from their pastor, but I'll share them anyway. I think when we vote, and I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. If you ask me privately, I'll give you my opinion, but I would never do that publicly. But a lot of times we look at our elected officials and we think, what knuckleheads. But my friends, we live in a democracy. We get who we vote for. We say politicians have no character. We've elected people with no character. And when people with character run, we don't vote for them, right? So voting is a big deal. And if this is an issue that you care about, a lot of politicians will talk about this, and there's a lot of grandstanding, right? They're trying to hit somebody's button, and just to be sensitive to that and say, that's one of the things I'm going to take into consideration because I really care about the Middle East. I've been really struck by my friends who are Jewish, who pretty early on got on a plane. Judy Schindler got on a plane in November. This hadn't been going on long, and flew over there. Michael Wal is over there today, and he's not staying in the safe part of the country. He's gone right where the fighting has been. I love that. I know my friends Hannah and Howell, their synagogue in Jerusalem is collecting money largely for what we think of as sort of Red Cross relief work at the border. And it's bipartisan. They help kind of anybody who's injured and sick. So that's the thing that we could probably, I could get you that information if you asked me about that, something to donate to where you could actually help people that are being hurt by this. Yeah. What else? Yes.
As an extension of what you've done for us today, is there an opportunity for an interfaith panel so that we can continually be updated and can you repeat the question?
I will, yeah. She's asking if there's a possibility of an interfaith panel. When I reached out to the people I showed you their pictures today, they all said, I'll come. And for right or wrong, they're probably smarter, wiser than I am. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to try to, as your pastor, give you, and somebody who's been to Israel a lot, to give you my read on things, having listened to them. Sometimes interfaith panels are really lovely, right? And we get together and we talk about our differences and we sing Kumbaya. This would be a hard moment to have a conversation. I'm not saying that it is impossible, but everything is so raw. So I think later, I think that's my judgment. I could be totally wrong on that. A panel could be like a great thing, but I think of people that I know who normally are good friends. It's a little hot right now, right? And I don't want to sponsor the event where they had a ruckus with each other. But maybe that wouldn't, it's just so hard right now. And the people that I talked to, and I'm not faulting anybody, it's so hot, nobody said, boy, the other guys really have a great point right now. And understandably, right? I'm not faulting anyone, but I mean, nobody said that. So someday. She's saying I'm a nice guy. I think it's her. Yes, Dennis.
Is there any hope for a third-party mediation to try and bring these two sides?
So, third-party mediation, that's a great question. So Henry Kissinger has died. He didn't get it done, right? And right now you read about there are all these initiatives. Egypt is trying to weigh in. Was it Denmark? I mean, all these people are trying to say, oh, yeah, we'll come, we'll mediate. I mean, Donald Trump said, man, I'll go strike a deal with those guys. And I'm not faulting him. Anybody who thinks, like, this is just easier than it looks, let's just go kind of, because like the two-state solution, to me, that forever has seemed really very simple. You guys get this land, you guys get this land. That seems easy from here, but when you're there on the ground, you look where they draw the line and like, wait, that's kind of desert over there, and there's this really cool tourist place over here. And then terrible things happen, right? So I say if we didn't have extremists, you'd still have a huge problem. You do have extremists, right? So Itzhak Rabin was very close, and an Israeli killed him. So you get that kind of stuff that goes on, because then once there's a terrorist act, like before 9/11, we could have said, let's have peace talks. Let's have peace talks. It wasn't even Iraq, was it? Like, that's a whole other problem. I don't want to get into that. Let's have peace talks with, the Arab world. But the day after 9/11, it's not, well, let's sit down and sing Kumbaya together. I mean, again, the temperature's too high. So, I mean, third party, people have tried that over the Oslo Accords. That was probably the noblest, closest effort, and people walked away and pretty much agreed to the Oslo Accords, and that unraveled within a year or two. Because it's so hot and there's so much injustice on all sides. Everybody's got a good point. Everybody's terribly flawed. It's kind of unique it's not unique. It happens all the time. But it's just the most egregious example of how that happens. Dick. So under the Ottoman Empire, if you're pro-Palestinian, you want to say, it almost sounds like there was a nation of Palestine that was there, and then the Jews invaded, and then they made the nation of Israel. There wasn't really a nation of Palestine. It was the Ottoman Empire. It was a region within the Ottoman Empire, pretty thinly populated. And they tended not to call it Palestine. Palestine for them wasn't I am a Palestinian so much as that was the area, like we would say we live in the southeast, right? It wasn't like a political entity so much as it's kind of the region where we live. It doesn't mean that it wasn't theirs. One of the things that came out in this Orrin Kessler book that I hadn't been attentive to before is that Jews start moving in, and the Arabs have lived there forever, and the Jews, they're pretty industrious people, these Israelis, so they start, irrigation, better farming techniques, they're building, they're doing all these good things, right? And so the Arabs begin to express resentment. And over, Jewish leaders, David Ben-Gurion, he was the worst at this. He would say, we're doing so much better with the land than they did. They'll be grateful that we were here. He even at one time said, once we become a majority, they'll be glad we're the majority because we're going to do such wonderful things for their land. That kind of arrogance is not helpful. So, yes. Diane.
But it's the verse that says that pray for the peace of Israel, but then it says that God says, those who curse Israel, I will curse. And it goes on like that. And it's a dividing point. How can we as Christians obey God and not take sides? It seems
I don't. I go back to my friend's son and the Venn diagrams, and you have the pro-Palestinians and the pro-Israelis, and they overlap in one person. I don't know if that's right, but he thinks that. At Vanderbilt, that's his one son. When he said that to me, I thought, that's how you're not going to talk me into saying, I'm pro-Israeli and to heck with the Palestinians. Like, you're not going to talk me into going there, but you're not going to talk me into I'm pro-Palestinian and Israel should just be wiped off the map. I'm not going to go there. Not based on me as a guy politically, but based on my theological understanding of God and Scripture. So I think we do too much side taking in our culture, period. That's why Americans can't talk to one another. We have these rigid sides, and they're both foolishness, but we don't think they're foolishness. We think, I am so wise and brilliant. I have understood the ultimate truth of reality, and those other people are such fools. How could they be such numbskulls, right? So we've done that so long that we think, yeah, I got to take a side. This sounds corny to say, but I think it's important. If we're going to take a side, I would take the side of the children. So I put up that photo of those children from Hebron. They don't want to fight anybody. They don't want to kill anybody. They don't want to judge anybody. They would love to play together and have peace. And so that's why it's such a big deal when children are killed. Children have been killed in this. Israeli children were abused and killed day one. What was the number? I heard 36 on the first day. That's 36 too many. I've now heard number of Palestinian children killed at over 8,000. That'd be 8,000 too many. But in the Holocaust, how many millions of Jews died? But 1.5 million Jewish children were killed, let's admit it, largely by people who would say, I'm Christian. Most of the people that did that, they were Lutherans or Catholics. Immense humility is always required when we talk about such things. I don't know. Anyway, okay. Yes, Jan. Yeah, and so I don't know about a panel idea. One of the things I want to do one day, and this is always hard to get there, American misunderstandings of Islam. It's phenomenal how ignorant most Americans are about Islam, right? They're all jihadists, if I said to you, Don, your neighbor is a Christian, that wouldn't tell you much about him. Right? He could be a Klansman. He could be a pious evangelical. He could be a Roman Catholic. He could be all kind of stuff, right? But if we say Muslim, people go, oh, yeah. So wrong. I mean, most Muslims that I know in America, they're thin Muslims. And most Christians I know in America are thin Christians. It's just the thing. Not you guys, because you came today. Anyway, I think we're past time, but I'm honored that you would come and listen. I didn't mean to talk so long, but I didn't know how not to say the things that I said. So thank you for coming. If you have thoughts, whatever, shoot me a note. That'd be great. We'll put this out on, if you're interested in sharing it with somebody. I think we've recorded a YouTube, I hope. Thumb it up, good. That'll appear maybe tomorrow, and it can be shared if it's worth doing that. So thank you for coming.